Harassment? That's just your imagination. Let it go.
Jim spoke harshly to my concern. Just when I thought I could rely on my husband back from his business trip, I couldn't believe how cold he was. It's one thing if it's just me, but what if something happens to our kid? As the identity of the person remains unclear, my anxiety and unease only grow.
I won't bother you, so we divorce.
Jim said lightly. When he came back, Jim was in an unexpected condition. The small plane he took during his business trip had crashed, leaving him paralyzed from the waist down. His parents looked panicked. It seems they're thinking they can't take care of him at their old age, neither financially nor physically. But Jim, far from worrying about his future, smirked. Annoyed by his transparent motives, I confronted him with the truth. What? We're already divorced, aren't we? Your mistress will take care of you, right? It's time to give back all the discomfort, the sadness, and the anger I've felt over the years. My name is Sarah, a 50-year-old housewife. Currently, I live with my husband Jim. But effectively, it feels like I'm living alone. Jim travels a lot for work. Thanks to that, I ended up raising our only daughter almost single-handedly. I'm not without my complaints, but I've managed to get by since he's working. Since our daughter got married, I've had even more time on my own. I've been getting better at spending my time alone, like collecting my favorite dishes or growing herbs in the garden to make herbal tea. Even if I redecorate and change my hairstyle, Jim, when he comes home, hardly seems to notice, which is disappointing. Still, I was looking forward to traveling together once Jim retires. I wonder what Italy is like. Which is more comfortable, Switzerland or Italy? I muse as I flip through a travel brochure, dreaming of a future trip with my husband. Jim, accustomed to international travel, would surely have a lot to tell. I had hoped. Little did I know that such an event, overturning the many years of our marriage, was about to occur. But first, let me take you back a bit. It all started over 15 years ago when I had just entered my 30s.
Now that our kid is in daycare, it should be okay for me to travel for work again, right? Starting next season, I'll be traveling just like when I was single.
Jim suddenly announced. During his single years, Jim spent about half of the year away on business trips to distant states. To continue at that pace meant he'd be absent quite a lot. Back then, our daughter was just over 3 years old, and I had just returned to a part-time job. Jim used to come home early in the evening to bathe our daughter and wash the dishes after dinner. A cooperative husband. The sudden disappearance of that support was, of course, shocking. If he's away often, not only housework, but everything else would fall on me alone. Whether our child got sick, or if I became ill myself. Wow, that's sudden. Our daughter is still so young. Hey, can't you at least cut it down to half as much as before you were single? My family lives quite far away. Not an environment where I can rely on them immediately. Jim's family is closer, but still an hour away. They are a bit far away to call in an emergency. I felt quite anxious, but Jim just frowned.
Can't help it. I've been holding off because of our family. I'm working for us. Don't complain.
Indeed, there was a vast difference between Jim's income and mine. When he says it's for the family, there's not much I can argue with. Ultimately, Jim quickly resumed a life filled with business trips. When he wasn't traveling, he'd come home late, and the time he spent at home decreased significantly. Sometimes, he even went on international business trips. I appreciated the souvenirs, but the long periods apart were inevitably lonely. We haven't had much time together lately. I wish we could have some time just for us. But Jim just laughed it off and didn't take it seriously. Instead, he took me out to eat with our daughter. I was happy to have a break from household chores and enjoy a good meal, but still, it's frustrating not being able to be together. That kind of life continued for about 2 years. When I went to pick up our daughter from daycare, I was told something unexpected.
Your daughter said she doesn't have a dad at home. Are you guys living separately or something?
The young teacher asked me cautiously. She approached me secretly when no one else was around. Realizing she suspected separation or divorce, I hurriedly explained. No, that's not it. He's here. But he comes home late and he's on business trips a lot. My daughter seems to think of him as someone who comes to play occasionally. I think she knows he's her father, but she meant that she rarely sees him at home. The teacher understood and apologized, but I felt a tightness in my chest. The cooperative man from when our daughter was a baby was gone, and recently Jim had become a husband who hardly participated in parenting. For our daughter, he might as well not be there. I continued to raise our daughter alone, and as she was about to graduate from high school, strange things began happening around me in my mid-40s. I started receiving persistent harassment. At first, I thought it was my imagination. The flowers at the entrance began to wilt easily, and just when I thought they had bloomed, they were torn off. I'd also find garbage thrown in our small yard. The tires of my bicycle, which I had just pumped up, were inexplicably flat. Upon closer inspection, several nails were stuck in them. The doorbell rang, so I looked through the monitor, but no one was there. I hesitantly opened the door after a while, and what met my eyes was a big drawn line. Someone had scribbled with a black marker on our white wall. When I asked the neighbors, it turned out that my house was the only one experiencing this. It finally dawned on me that someone was deliberately targeting my house to cause harm. No one had seen any suspicious figures, but it was creepy not knowing who it was. I immediately consulted Jim, scared, but his response was unbelievable.
Harassment? That's just your imagination. Let it go.
He said as he loosened his tie, clearly showing his annoyance. I was disappointed that he didn't offer to help. I couldn't help but grumble. You could at least listen to what I have to say. You've been so cold lately. This is your home too. And what if something happens to our child? Then Jim's face turned visibly irritated. I thought he might at least be concerned if it involved our child, but it seemed he didn't care. Jim listened to my complaints in silence and then retorted with a click of his tongue.
Be quiet. I'm tired. If you're going to complain that much, deal with it yourself.
With that, he left me in astonishment and disappeared into the bathroom. I didn't expect him to ignore me like this. That night, I couldn't sleep at all and ended up exhausted. The next morning, Jim overtly tried to cheer me up. He made toast and even brewed coffee, though I hadn't asked for it.
Sorry about last night. I was tired and irritable. So what's up? What were you talking about?
He asked me what had happened, even though I had already explained everything the night before. I was disappointed he hadn't listened, but maybe I should be grateful he was willing to hear it again. After listening to my story again, Jim hummed through his nose. Then, with a casual tone, as if it were nothing special, he said,
Maybe it's just kids playing a prank? You'll lose out if you worry about it. A scribble won't bring the house down. Just leave it be. It'll probably stop soon. Well, if you catch them doing it right in front of you, Just yell hey at them, huh?
His dismissive tone made me sad, realizing he didn't understand my worries. But perhaps there was some truth to Jim's words. I decided to pull myself together and look on the bright side. However, the subtle harassment continued for a long time. And now, I'm 50 years old. Jim is still frequently away on business trips. He mostly travels to two places. The short trips to a state about a 2-hour train ride from our home, and the longer trips, nearly a month long, to a state about a 2-hour flight away, which is closer to Jim's parents' home. When he is home, he mostly sleeps. He can be a bright and kind husband when we talk, but I've given up on his help with the housework. The subtle harassment continues and has already gone on for years. I finally got fed up and decided to take action, even hiring professionals to find the perpetrator. If we can clearly identify the person, it will surely be a relief. I wouldn't shy away from suing them. I've always wanted to say that, excitedly waiting for the results, but then I learned something shocking. The person harassing me was someone I never expected. I was utterly devastated. I immediately told my daughter, who had already moved out, and my parents. They gave me many comforting words over the phone, but I felt completely unable to recover. I cried for 3 days straight, eventually pulling myself together alone. Jim is coming back next week. I can't just keep crying, I have to pick myself up. At that moment, that's when the phone rang loudly in the night. What? The plane! The plane Jim was on during his trip to another state had an accident. All passengers were seriously injured. It was a miracle he survived. Jim regained consciousness quite soon, but he wasn't unharmed. He suffered a head injury, and the left side of his body was paralyzed. Since the state is close to Jim's parents' home, they went there first. Understood. I'll be there tomorrow or the day after. I packed my things in a hurry. Despite being unaccustomed to the journey, I managed to make it to the hospital. As I approached his room, an unexpectedly cheerful voice reached my ears.
Lucky to be alive. My right hand's still good.
I sighed and opened the door. Jim was wrapped in bandages around his head and arm, but seemed surprisingly well, which was a bit of a letdown. Noticing me, Jim managed a somewhat awkward smile. His parents noticed me and stood up to greet.
Sarah, we're going to be a burden on you from now on.
His mother, Bonnie, told me that. From now on, huh? I murmured to myself. I must have looked quite stern. Then Jim's father, Michael, said gravely,
It's tough to burden a wife at this age. If it's too hard for you to care for him alone, we understand if you want a divorce.
His voice was filled with pain. I almost interrupted him, saying not to talk like that. As I bit my lip to hold back, an incongruously light-hearted voice was heard.
So Dad agrees too. I think the same. Let's get a divorce since we don't want to be a burden.
It was Jim who said so. Despite his severe condition, Jim was grinning, not seeming anxious about his future at all. This bizarre scene even startled his parents, but I already knew why Jim was saying such things. Fuming quietly, I finally spoke up. What? We're already divorced, aren't we? Your mistress will take care of you, right?
What?
Michael, who had been half turned to face me, looked shocked by my words. It must have been a bolt from the blue for him, so his surprise was understandable. Jim's face froze in a half smile, clearly not expecting that I had found out. Beside me, Bonnie looked shocked to hear about the divorce. but showed a different kind of surprise when she heard about the mistress.
What? You mean from that time?
Bonnie sharply slapped Jim's immobile leg. Michael and Jim looked bewildered. Bonnie's reaction was unexpected for me too, so I decided to ask her for more details. Bonnie, did you know something? Bonnie sighed deeply. She opened and closed her mouth lightly, searching for words. I waited silently until she began to speak. Occasionally, I pressed down on something I had brought with me in my bag to ensure its presence. Finally, Bonnie, glaring intently at Jim, told me this story.
One time, when he came to visit home because he was nearby on a business trip, right after he left, I also had to go out for errands, and there he was, walking intimately with some woman I didn't recognize near the station. He said she was his colleague then, but she was a tall young woman with dyed hair and long nails.
Hearing the description, I knew immediately who it was. I took out an envelope marked "Investigation Report" from my bag. Selecting one of the bundles inside, I said indifferently, "Oh, that one must be Kayla from another state. Maybe she came along for the trip? It's not far, and I believe your home area is a popular tourist spot, right?" Michael, wide-eyed, took the first bundle. Inside were several photos of Jim, looking a bit flashy and cozy with a young woman. Bonnie also peered over, her face looking like it was the end of the world. Suddenly, Michael seemed to realize something and muttered.
Did you say that one?
I nodded slowly. This was indeed the reason for my utmost despair and resurgence of anger. Jim had a mistress, and not just one. He wasn't just with one mistress. There were at least two, and several one-night stands too. I had already prepared the divorce papers, so he was probably planning to marry one of them after divorcing me. By the way, the other woman is an older lady named Jessica, quite wealthy and single. I pulled out the second bundle. This contained photos of a distinctly different type of woman from the first, looking enraptured as she leaned on Jim. More images clearly indicated their relationship. Even Michael had to look away. So, that divorce form you had in the closet, I've taken the liberty of using it. Kind of me, right? A chance to divorce without alimony. Let's get married. You even mailed that to Kayla. You should be pleased. As I said this, Jim made a face I had never seen before. The shock might have been from finding the divorce papers, or perhaps it was from knowing the content of the emails I mentioned. Jim turned his face towards the wall, remaining silent. Even though he might want to escape, his body won't move. That's probably the only form of escapism he can manage now. Thinking about it, it is pitiful that he's become disabled. However, I have no intention of showing mercy. Originally, when he returned from his business trip, I was ready to confront him with a lawyer. Things have changed a bit, but it just means that Judgment Day has come a bit sooner. I gave him another blow. "Come in, Kayla." I called out into the hallway. Then, a tall young woman with flashy nails and makeup entered. It was none other than Kayla, one of his mistresses. Standing beside me, she looked at Jim in his terrible state and grimaced. "Gosh." Jim turned his face away from the wall and looked at us, startled. "Can't believe it? I actually had a detective agency track you down." Kayla walked into the room, clearly in a bad mood. Perhaps the inappropriate scent of her perfume indicated she was due to start work soon. Kayla is a nightclub hostess, moderately popular.
You said it wouldn't come out. I can't cover this month's rent because of the alimony. It's really annoying.
She spat out angrily. After learning from the detective agency that he had 2 mistresses, I heard even more details. It seemed that Kayla wasn't really serious about Jim. So, through a lawyer, I settled things with Kayla first. She easily admitted to the affair, apologized, and said it was all just part of her job. When I mentioned the divorce and demanded alimony, she paid up without any fuss. It seemed all too practiced. When I promised not to tell her family or workplace if she provided evidence of the affair, she agreed with a big smile. The shocking email saying, "Let's get married," arrived just as I was reaching the hospital. As soon as Kayla received it, she reported to me immediately.
Wow. Seriously, ma'am, your husband is something else. He's seriously injured, right? And yet he sends this kind of email. Isn't his vitality a bit too much?
Talking to me as if we were friends, I was truly baffled. It was clear there was no love for Jim. Thinking why he would even consider marrying this woman made me sad about Jim's poor judgment. It felt like a slap in my own face that I was even contemplating spending my life with him. After such exchanges, here we are. Seeing Jim, who was still clueless about the situation, I deliberately asked, "Kayla, are you going to marry Jim?"
Absolutely not. You're banned from my bar. So never coming back.
Kayla scoffed in a manner only a true femme fatale could. I felt sorry inside and glanced at his parents. As expected, Michael was furiously red, and Bonnie started sobbing miserably. Amidst this, Jim, completely misreading the room, let out a pitiful plea.
Wait, let's get married. You're young. Have my children.
His words sounded slightly slurred, perhaps due to paralysis around his mouth. Even so, to suggest such a thing after becoming paralyzed. While not like Kayla, his vitality did seem excessive.
No way.
With just those words, Kayla dismissively cut him off and sneered. Then, she turned to me with a glossy smile, giving me a meaningful look. Seeming to want me to say it, I reluctantly informed Jim. Kayla's actually getting married to a very wealthy man soon. You were just a client, not a lover at all. She acknowledged the physical affair, though. Watching Jim's reaction, his face drained of color as he was struck speechless. It seems he was completely unaware of everything. At that moment, Michael raised his voice, sounding close to tears.
Can't you even tell when someone is serious about you?
Kayla, having finished her business, bowed to me and left the room. Jim called out, "Hey, and wait," but she didn't even turn around. "Well, you were hoping Kayla would take care of you. Too bad that didn't work out," I said slowly, emphasizing each word. Jim's lips trembled. Perhaps he was panicked. I could see sweat beginning to form on the tip of his nose, which hadn't been there before. "You still have Jessica. Why don't you call her?" "I've checked, and she's living in the next district. It's a bit far, but she can make it within visiting hours." I was gearing up for the final confrontation, a direct encounter with Jessica. After all, the years of harassment I endured were what led me to discover Jim's infidelity. It turns out the culprit was Jessica. Since Jim wasn't helping, I decided to resolve it myself. With the little money I had from my part-time job, I hired a detective agency to find the perpetrator, and it turned out to be Jessica, a woman nearly 70 years old living in the next district, with whom I had no prior acquaintance. However, I knew the name of the area. It was one of Jim's frequent business trip destinations. I had them investigate whether Jessica had any connection to Jim. Initially, I wondered if she bore some grudge, but it turned out to be an affair. I couldn't have imagined Jim would be involved with an elderly woman, almost old enough to be his mother. Despite being shaken, I asked for further investigation to see if there were more crimes, and the evidence just kept coming. Overwhelmed by the situation, I had them also check our house. Finding the divorce papers made me feel as though God was on my side. Jessica is quite an older woman, very wealthy. Seems she's contributed quite a bit to him. Not a penny has come my way, though. I explained to his parents while Jim averted his eyes. But as I finished speaking, he defiantly said,
Yeah, that's right. That old lady is totally smitten with me. As you said, she's got money. Even if she's old, she can hire a caregiver. I'll leave my nursing to her.
Since Jim couldn't use the phone by himself, I helped him operate the smartphone. The thought that this was our last cooperation as a couple, I was utterly distasteful. Bonnie was already crying inconsolably. It's not surprising to hear that your own son has not one, but two mistresses, and one of them is about your age. It would bring anyone to tears.
I'm in the hospital because of a plane accident. Don't worry, I'm alive. Just a bit of trouble with my body. Can you come now? My parents are here too, and I'd like you to meet them.
Jim said in a feeble, coaxing tone. Considering his attitude just moments ago, it was the worst feeling. While waiting for Jessica to arrive, which would take a few hours, I stepped out of the hospital room with his parents. We talked about what comes next over some chilled coffee. His parents apologized repeatedly. I hold no grudge against these two, but I did tell them that it's best if our paths diverged here. Eventually, Jessica arrived at the hospital room full of energy, unaware of the chaos she was walking into. Yet, considering the long harassment she inflicted on our family, I thought it fair she feels a bit of discomfort. You. As Jessica walked into the room and saw me, her eyes narrowed angrily. She approached me aggressively, spitting as she yelled,
"Why is his mistress here?"
I was taken aback, momentarily not understanding what was being said. But as soon as I grasped Jessica's meaning, all the pieces fell into place. Did you not know that Jim and I are married? Jessica's eyes widened in shock, and her mouth fell open. I bit my lip in realization. Then Michael asked her,
What's going on? You are Jim's mistress, aren't you? The woman here, Sarah, she's legitimately Jim's wife.
Jessica stood frozen, her expression one of utter confusion. I wondered if she was okay, but then she staggered. I tried to catch her, but she pushed me away. Bonnie, who had been crying, offered her a chair, and Jessica collapsed into it weakly. Jim, though looking uncomfortable, cleared his throat and addressed Jessica.
Jessica, well, actually, we're already divorced, right?
His question was directed at me at the end. I nodded reluctantly since the divorce papers had already been submitted. Then Jessica sharply looked up.
How long ago was that?
We divorced this morning, I replied without missing a beat. And at that, Jessica collapsed completely. Jim, who had summoned her, struggled to comfort her. As we waited for Jessica to calm down, the visiting time ended. We all headed to his parents' house. Sipping the tea Bonnie had made, the most awkward conversation began. Jessica lives in the next district, close to one of Jim's frequent business destinations. and is a shareholder in a company that does business with Jim's employer. The name of the company is Simpson Corporation. Jessica's late husband had been a prominent figure at Simpson Corporation. Their meeting happened about 5 years ago, when she visited Simpson Corporation on business and clicked with Jim, who was also on a trip. Excited by a romance with someone 20 years her junior, Jessica was completely smitten. However, she soon noticed another woman's presence around her boyfriend. Following Jim back from his business trip, she saw him enter our house and mistook me for a young mistress who appeared later, prompting her harassment. "Didn't you check with Jim?" Jessica shook her head weakly at my question. It seems she isn't the type who confronts the one who cheated, but rather hates the other woman involved. During this, his parents brought out an album. It contained photos of mine and Jim's wedding, our daughter's birth, and our family over the years.
It's true. Oh, what have I done? I was the mistress all along.
Jessica murmured in despair. But the real despair was for Jim to come. The end was drawing near. The next morning, we all rushed into Jim's hospital room as soon as visiting hours began. Not just his parents, but Jessica, who had stayed elsewhere. His parents spoke first. The result of yesterday's sad discussion had angered them the most.
Jim, what have you done? We told Jessica about Kayla yesterday. Sarah, of course, but this lady too. How much they've been hurt. How could you deceive even your parents?
Bonnie, always serious, couldn't forgive him for having 2 mistresses, and she was furious that he lied about divorcing to avoid burdening anyone. Michael also condemned the infidelity, then added,
You keep saying you have no money, and I thought it was because you were spending it on your family, but it was for your affairs. We've been struggling on a small pension. Is affair more important than your parents, you ungrateful wretch?
Both of them were furious. In fact, during the investigation of the affair, I realized that the salary I received from Jim was less than what he actually earned. The account where Jim received his salary was under his control, and he siphoned off about 30% each month before transferring it to our family account. It seems the portion he took was mostly spent on Kayla. It was my fault too for not noticing for so long, but what he did was too deceitful. Additionally, I had another gift for him. In the form of a final blow, I played this recording for Jessica. I said as I played back Jim's words recorded in this hospital room yesterday. It was the exchange when I told him to call Jessica, primarily for her to hear.
Yeah, that old lady is totally smitten with me. As you said, she's got money. Even if she's old, she can afford a caregiver. I'll leave my nursing to her.
Jessica's sobbing when she heard Jim's voice was intense. The word anguish seems created for such moments. It looked so severe that it even made the past harassments seem negligible. I began to worry if perhaps I had gone too far.
I can't forgive you. I trusted you.
Jessica said before she left. Having lost Jessica, who was supposed to take care of him, even Jim turned pale. Had he not imagined that calling her here would lead to this? It made me realize how oblivious he could be. From the next day, Jim's parents stopped visiting him. There was no communication with Kayla. Jim tried to reconcile with Jessica over the phone, but she was bedridden with despair, and instead her furious relatives confronted him harshly. Jim was abandoned by his mistresses and disowned by his family, with half his body paralyzed, alone. How he planned to live was beyond me. Not that it was any of my concern anymore. After everything was settled, I moved out of the houses I had grown used to. I relocated to a condo perfect for living alone. Just before moving, his parents visited and handed me the alimony Jim owed me in one lump sum.
We'll consider our son as if he never existed.
We're sorry for the trouble.
His parents said one after the other. They were still incredibly angry and showed no signs of forgiving Jim, and they promised to ensure he wouldn't contact me. With all this unexpected money, maybe I should take a trip abroad, now happily single and living well. Jim's actions over the years were so egregious that I squeezed $15,000 in alimony out of him. Although I didn't take any for the affair itself, as Jessica was truly unaware, I did demand compensation for the harassment, which was promptly paid and apologized for. I had already received $5,000 in alimony from Kayla, so now I find myself unexpectedly wealthy. A cold wind blew in my heart, but my wallet was warm. Perhaps I'll take a long overseas vacation with my daughter. I'm going to go on the path to please myself from now on.